Live from SABC Studios in Auckland Park, welcome to this week's last edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight, the political week that was. Our panel for this evening looks at various incidents, occurrences, pronouncements, utterances we heard and saw this week. Not only what they could all be telling us about the state of politics in South Africa today, but also the possibility that they could well shape discourse over the next couple of years leading to the 2024 elections. That is our focus tonight on this episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. Well, let me introduce you to our panelists for this evening. David Maimela is the Executive Director of Johannesburg-based policy think tank, Policy Space.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your viewers at home.
Dr. Levi Ndo is a political analyst based at the Tshwane University of Technology. Please unmute, Prof. And of course, Professor Begim Gomez-Zulu is a politics lecturer and analyst based at the University of the Western Cape. Welcome to you too, Prof.
Good evening, my brother, and good evening to our viewers, and good evening to my colleagues as well.
Well, I suppose, ANC politics gives us an entry point into tonight's conversation, not the least because they are the governing party, but also because they had their fair share of, shall we call them, rather interesting moments this week. The public protector upped the ante, again asking that President Cyril Ramaphosa be asked to appear before the parliamentary committee looking into her fitness to hold office. Then there were reports that the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal is not averse to the idea of backing him for yet another term, but that's if, of course, their comrades from other provinces convince them that indeed he is the best man for the job. A bit surprising for many people, given the fact that everyone seems to have thought that the faction that won that province in the last at the last provincial conference is or was thought to be opposed to him staying on as ANC president. Then the week ending with victims of the Marikana massacre announcing that he, together with Lon Min and the government, will form part of a R1 billion lawsuit that they intend to lodge for that tragedy that took place 10 years ago and which we'll be commemorating in about 3 days' time. I don't know if these three things, and of course more around President Cyril Ramaphosa, specifically David Maimela, mean or say anything to you.
Well, thank you, Vuyo. I think that in the main, it's going to come down to political survival of the president. I think some of the issues you have outlined, they actually speak to some negative trends or negative developments insofar as his political career is concerned. So what I've looked at in particular when it comes to the issue that relates to the Phala farm allegations, if you look at it, if you like, there are two ways of looking at it if he's to survive that at all. Is that in the year of the National Conference of the ANC, it will be important that he probably succeeds at doing at least two things. The first one is that he has, for his own sake and perhaps his supporters in the party, he's got to mount a convincing legal argument insofar as those allegations are concerned. So that legal area remains, and it cannot be avoided. He's got to deal with it, either through the public protector or through the courts, and ultimately through Parliament. But in the end, even if it takes that legal kind of route, in the end, it is a political process. Then the second one is that, of course, and this is quite obvious to many, is that it will also depend on the balance of factions in the party. So, I mean, to the extent that his faction is very strong and dominant and very much entrenched, and that it defines the agenda, he is likely to see through up to conference and possibly be re-elected, because then it's going to be high politics for high stakes.
Dr. Ndou?
Good evening, Vuyo. Good evening to the viewers at home. Of course, this is a very interesting period in the politics of South Africa, and in particular, the politics of the ANC. And what we do see is the situation where most politicians from different provinces, regions, branches, and of course at national level, are actually trying their best to position themselves in order for them to become a factor when it comes to the national conference in December. I fully agree with my colleague, Mr. Maimela, that with all these challenges surrounding the president, it will require a lot of work to be done in order to see President Ramaphosa in a different light, looking at the number of issues that are being raised surrounding him. Of course, there is something you cannot ignore, which is the voice of public opinion. Even though the president might have taken the right decision by not talking more about these issues, as much as he keeps quiet for a quite longer period, whilst of course the investigation is going on, there might be those who might be using this as an opportunity to attack him or to further their own views regarding this matter. Another aspect that for me has been quite interesting is what you raised, the issue that talks to the politics of KwaZulu-Natal, that if you look at the trend that has been going on in South Africa, in many other provinces, is that post a provincial conference, we have not observed people moving out of office or those that are in government being removed and be replaced by those who have been elected. There has been a trend in Mpumalanga where the PEC came in and the PEC had to focus on its responsibilities and those who in government had to continue doing their work. Gauteng has actually done the same. David Makura is nowhere. He's not even in the PEC, but he continues to run the affairs of government as the premier. But when you come to KwaZulu-Natal, few days after the conference, you have the premier resigning. You have other members of the executive committee being moved out of government, either they've resigned or they've been moved. But that also then talks to KwaZulu-Natal having to do its things in a different manner. And that will require, of course, a lot of explanation on the part of the leadership of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, because people will continue to ask questions whether Zikalala has been forced to resign or whether he actually did that voluntarily. That is the question that the leadership of KwaZulu-Natal will constantly be required to answer.
For you, Professor Mngomezulu? Professor Mngomezulu, can you hear us? Okay, his line seems to have frozen. Hopefully we'll be able to re-establish that line pretty quickly. If I may come back to you, Mr. Mayamela, your reading of what the Constitutional Court ruling on Ace Magashule could actually do to perhaps break the back, for lack of a better word, of better words, of the whatever group that may still be intent on ensuring that come December, Cyril Ramaphosa gets dethroned.
Yeah, well, as things stand now, it doesn't look that there is a very strong contender to contest the incumbent president of the ANC in December in the National Conference. But, you know, as they always say, in politics, a week is a long time. It is possible that, you know, there could be a strong contender, but as to whether that contender, you know, will ultimately win or not, it will depend on a number of things. Firstly, on how well organized the counterbalancing faction is, whether they do, you know, win support of majority of branches, regions, and provinces, whether at all there is a particular agenda. Now, you may want to quibble with the quality of the agenda, but you know, politics work in that funny way that you will find that even if, you know, the agenda is of a poor quality, or that the policy platform or the ideas around that agenda are actually not well articulated, they are incoherent, they are poor. But, you know, political support does not always follow the logic of rationality.
In fact, I mean, that's what I was going to ask, because, I mean, if you take Polokwane as an example,
yes.
You didn't really need to have issues. You just had to have enough will and people, it's a numbers game, as we know, to not want the incumbent or to throw their weight behind a different candidate. And that's all you really needed for...
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, all you have to do is to create a villain and create a victim in the process. So that's what really transpired. I was actually going to pull that example of Polokwane. But this actually is the disappointing part about South African politics, is that we have reached what I call, in the past several years, what I actually call the age of the politician, where the fortunes of the politician are actually rising and getting better, and the fortunes of the people that are supposed to be served by politics and the politicians are actually not rising. So if you look at the quality of standards of the politician, it's doing quite very well by all indications. But if you look at, as you might have seen with Stats SA numbers, that in the past 10 years or so, poverty has worsened in the country. So, so you are at that stage where it's, you know, about Puma Singene, and then it's a contest of who's more beautiful than the other. But you are not getting the actual substance and the ideas around a policy platform. And I do think that whether in the ANC, DA, or in the EFF, across the country generally, you do have to have a strong platform, policy platform for us to be able to get out of the crisis we're in.
Professor Ngomezulu, I mean, does the absence of a challenger to Cyril Ramaphosa currently, perhaps coupled with the absence of a clear-cut or proper, sort of rallying point or issues, necessarily mean that no one can pull it off over the next 4 months leading to the elective conference at Nasrec?
Not at all, Putvuyo. First of all, sorry about the connection problem.
No
I think
worries.
I forgot to charge my my router. No, honestly speaking, I don't believe so. Because for once, politics is a very dirty game. We know that by now. Yesterday, in fact, I was saying to some colleagues that if you are a politician, the best advice
Dr. Ndo, I'll have to come to you. The same question. Does the absence of an agenda and a candidate necessarily mean that Cyril Ramaphosa will cruise, given the amount of time left before the ANC goes to that elective conference in December?
Vuyo, there's a possibility to get a number of surprises. As Professor Ngomezulu has been saying, that at any given time, someone might be able to raise his or her hand, and if that person has sufficient support, of course, that person can then be able to make a surprise. But if you look at time now, we only left with very, very few months to go towards the elective conference. And the fortunate or an unfortunate situation is that a number of provinces have already made their pronouncements. And what might be the challenge for Ramaphosa to get the second term in the party might be the issues that we started discussing earlier on, the issues that relates to the Para issue, and all these few surrounding issues. It also appears as if there is no other contender that has actually raised their hand and make it known that indeed I am available to contest President Ramaphosa. If that was the case, there would have been a way that we would know about that. Of course, there are names that have been raised. Former Health Minister Dr. Mkhize. There has been the name of Lindiwe Sisulu, amongst others that have actually shown ambition. But what we mostly hear are issues that relates to other positions except that of the presidency. I have to go back, Vuyo, to the issue that you raised about the suspended SG. I think my view is that you don't necessarily have to always pursue these legal issues, because equally they appear to be further weakening the suspended Secretary General of the ANC, especially when the ANC has had a principle that says that those who take the party to court are actually defined differently by the party. And if you constantly take the matters to court and you don't make it, it actually weakens his position or his appetite to go back to the party. And this, of course, it's another big blow for the suspended SG of the ANC. My view is that if indeed is still a support within the party, he should actually try, or his supporters must actually try to use internal processes of the party for him to be able to be brought back into the party. Unfortunately now, as matters goes now, you will also then get a situation where even those who might have appeared to support him might also be weakened by the actions that he is constantly taking to courts, and he still does not make it.
Professor Mngomezulu, I'm hoping you're back this time around on a more stable line. Could it be then that KwaZulu-Natal looked at all scenarios and saw how, with all his pala stuff, the Cyril Ramaphosa remains the strongest candidate? And given the fact that there is no one yet who has come through to actually, stand against him or raise their names, or as a candidate who could actually stand against them. And given the reality that the ANC is in a much weaker, perhaps the weakest, in fact, that's what Cyril Ramaphosa himself said at that policy conference a couple of weeks ago, that the ANC is at its weakest. Then a province like KwaZulu-Natal, even though they may have wanted to pursue a different course, looks at the situation and sees that the odds are stashed against themselves, but also against the ANC in the forthcoming election, national and provincial election in a couple of years' time. Then they would have had to bite the bullet, having read the situation and thought, you know what? We need the ANC to stay in power, whatever the factional battles and issues. Hence, they are now speaking the language we saw them with their chairperson speaking this week.
You know what, Budvoyo? I think we are being too simplistic about this issue. It's more complex than it appears at face value. First of all, my view is that our president, that is the president of the country, not just the president of the ANC, has never been a strong candidate from my perspective. And I'll tell you why. I know that there are people who don't like when I make these statements, to the extent that some even don't shy away from saying that I hate the president, which I find very uncomfortable. But the reality of the matter is our president won in 2017 with just 179 votes. All of us know that. It's out there in the open. I'm not making up the numbers. That is the first point. And then starting from 2017 up to now, we have to ask the question, has the president amassed more power, or has he even taken a compromised position due to the number of issues that my colleagues have just been alluding to, including the Pala matter, the Marikana issue also doesn't want to disappear, and a lot of other issues. And then with the president himself admitting that the ANC that he inherited in 2017 is now at its weakest form. The question then is, under whose leadership did the ANC arrive at this point? So if you put all those, I've not mentioned all the points, but if you put just the points I've mentioned together, then that leads me to the conclusion that our president at the moment is not the strongest candidate. But then coming to your point that it looks like there is no contender at the moment, you are absolutely right. But then we have to ask another question. Why is that the case? Has the ANC opened an opportunity for branches and provinces to nominate presidential candidates? Unless I've missed something, as far as I know, they've not done that. So then my understanding, therefore, is that once that opportunity has been given to the provinces and the branches to do that, you might find that a couple of names will surface. And then even if those names are not the strongest, but if they find the president also in a compromised position, they might surprise you and then end up winning in December. So at the moment, as things stand at the moment, my understanding is that the reason why we're talking about the president of the ANC and the president of the country is because he is the incumbent. So it doesn't have to indicate whether he's available or not. We just assume that because he has served one term, he will still be available to serve another term on condition that his party members suggest that his name should be put on the list. But then once the process is open, you will be surprised. And politics is a very dirty game, as I was saying earlier on, which means that anything can happen between now and November, not even December, between now and November. And then, of course, you might be surprised to find that some names surface and then people vote for them, not because they're the strongest candidates, but because maybe they have issues with the current president. And then the end result would not be what most people would expect. So just watch the space.
Yeah, but then, Prof, I mean, if you look back, for example, at Polokwane, where, you know, the challenger beat the incumbent, there was a dress rehearsal for that a couple of years before. So there was a great deal of time for consolidation. In fact, Tax was essentially, you know, a dress rehearsal for Polokwane, because remember, even among those people who didn't want Thabo Mbeki and were keen to support an alternative candidate, irrespective of who they are, because that's what they coalesced around. You know, there were doubting Thomases there. There were people who weren't sure whether that would, in fact, they could pull something like that out, because to go against an incumbent, however strong or weak, is not an easy thing to do. But time was a big factor in making Polokwane happen, number one. And if you go back also to what happened in Bloemfontein, for example, where Kgalema Motlanthe challenged. You know, again, you know, time played a big part, you know, in the. Whereas the situation is different this time around, no matter how weak the incumbent may perhaps be.
You know, you have just answered part of your question by saying that, one, we are dealing with a different political context. The periods you've just referred to were indeed different from what we're having now, and basically the context is different. But then secondly, even the incumbents we're talking about are different from the ones you have just referred to. And the manner in which they had assumed the position of being leaders of the ANC were different in terms of the margin between the winner and the loser. The margin was huge, but this is not the case right now. And then thirdly, one of the perceptions out there is that the moment you try to stand against the president, you are then faced with a number of challenges, most of which are legal in nature. And then once that happens, then of course the ANC resolution, 2017 resolution, the step-aside resolution then kicks in. So you might find that there are people who might be wanting to challenge the president, but they are strategically lying low, as it were, until the time is right, with the understanding that they might in fact stand a better chance than if they were to do it now. Because if you do it now, like the likes of Ace Magashule, for example, did, then you know what the end result was. And then, of course, there might be people who might be reading the situation from that angle. The incumbents that you are referring to has a number of reference points. A recent case, for example, is that of the premier of my province in the name of Sihlezi Galala. He was an incumbent, but he lost to Siboniso Duma. And then you look at the American case, Trump was the incumbent, but then he lost, and dismally so. So basically, the point about incumbency works in two ways. One, it can assist you as an incumbent because you are occupying the position and therefore you are basically lobbying from a strong position. But then on the other hand, some of the mistakes you would have made while in office might work against you. So the incumbency issue, I think that we can look at it from both sides, that on the one hand it assists you, but then on the other hand, it is a disadvantage to you as an incumbent because you might lose a position just because of that, the fact that you are an incumbent.
David Maimela, I mean, what do you think of that possibility that Prof has just raised?
No, I actually choose to think differently, Vuyo. I actually think that at this stage, for the ANC as a party and for any faction in the ANC, the politics of contestations are actually meaningless in the in the light of losing, or the possibility of losing a general election in 2024. And I do think that it is actually this navel-gazing and inward-looking attitude that has actually sort of brought the ANC to this point. Now, if at all the various factions and leaders were to contest internally in the party, they should be contesting on the basis of who has the best ideas and the best leaders amongst themselves to take South Africa out of the current state of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. And because that is actually the true state of the nation. So the internal politics of the ANC, the EFF, or any other political party matter less to the electorate and the general population of South Africa. What South Africans are looking for is whether politics and political parties and political leaders can put forward workable ideas and programs that can actually take us out of the problems that we are facing today. So, and that is why at the moment the biggest crisis that the ANC faces is not who is a better leader and who's stronger and so on, which faction looks nicer and so on. It's a question of legitimacy of the party itself in totality. That, for almost 30 years, it has made a number of strides in different areas. A bit of steady economic growth in the first 10 to 15 years, opening up the professions, building up a middle class, although it's a contested concept and reality, but building up a black middle class and so on. So it has done that, stabilizing the position of South Africa in the global arena. All of that is now standing in a precipice because of the legitimacy of the party, legitimacy of the ideas that the party espouses, legitimacy of the leadership it has, and whether they have got fresh ideas to take us out of the current quagmire. So, it would be good and well for people to win the battle, but the battle is in December, but the war is in 2024, and I think that's the real test for any leader or any faction.
In fact, that's where I want us next to go to, the politics of the opposition, the state of the opposition, on the back of some events that also happened this week, and what your thoughts are around the state of the opposition. But I have to conclude this ANC part with this. News just in. Some aggrieved members of the ANC in the Northwest Province earlier applied for an urgent interdict at the Northwest High Court that sat until a few minutes ago in Mahikeng, hoping to bar the ANC Interim Provincial Committee and the Interim Regional Committees from voting in the Provincial Conference expected to be held in Rustenburg this weekend. The members said the term of the current IPC and IRCs ended 3 years ago. The members said should the committees take part in the conference, the process would be unfair and unconstitutional. Well, the judge has just granted the interdict. Our reporter Silwane Kakao is there and will be joining us a little later on to update us about what is going on. But what that effectively means, panel, is that once again, another, ANC provincial conference is experiencing serious troubles, which again speaks to, the parlor state in which many, or at least some of the ANC provinces are in. Just your thoughts, Dr. Ndo?
Vuyo, the ANC in the Northwest has been in disarray for quite some time. The IPC has been in charge of the affairs of the ANC since 2018. And that will tell you that the ANC has not had branches and effective branches, regions, and the entire structure of the ANC had collapsed in the Northwest, even though the IPC had to pull up all the pieces and ensure that at the end of the day, they move towards a conference. Equally, the Northwest Province has observed at governance level a number of state departments that had to be put under administration because they've been dysfunctional. So in the Northwest, you have got politics of the ANC in disarray. You have got governance that has collapsed. Some of the worst performing municipalities in the Republic are found in the Northwest Province. So that tells you that the Northwest Province, it's in a very, very big crisis. But equally, if you have members of the interim structure having stayed for quite a longer period of time, it tells you that it has always been very difficult for the same team to be able to bring all the members of the party together and have a functional provincial structure in the province. You might blame it on those who were in power before the IPC was established. You might also blame it on the IPC's capacity not to be able to run the affairs of the province effectively. You have also had at provincial level the change of political leadership constantly in that province. So it's one province that requires a lot of attention on the part of the leadership of the ANC and the ANC members themselves to be able to stand up and build the structures there. Now that there is this interdict granted, I know that there's going to be anger directed to those that have actually made this application because those that were supposed to be participating in the vote, especially in the leadership in the interim leadership, might be aggrieved. Some of the delegates there might be aggrieved. So instead of the province coming together just out of this court order, then you're actually going to see the province further getting divided, and building the structures of the ANC in the province has to restart afresh.
Well, after the break, we're going to look at whether the opposition can actually seize the moment or the opportunities presented by the ANC's problems come the 2024 election. Up next, we look at the state of the opposition on the back of some incidents that we saw and heard this past week. Don't go away. Welcome back on the show this evening. We have a panel of political analysts, Kim Gomez-Zulu, Levi Ndo, and David Maimela, talking about the state of South African politics after a busy week, where lots and lots of things actually happened. We spoke earlier about, the stuff around President Cyril Ramaphosa. I want to go to the opposition. I mean, you had former DA youth leader, former DA deputy federal chairperson Makashule Ghana deciding to desert his political home after 20 years. We saw the further meltdown of COPE, some of their leaders, including the national spokesperson of the party, asking their president to step down from his parliamentary activities. No doubt a sign of, lack of, an expression of lack of confidence in his leadership abilities. We've also been seeing over the past few days Newcomer Action SA having serious problems in KwaZulu-Natal, meaning that its ability to conquer more provincial supporters in other provinces beyond Gauteng is now being seriously attended. Just your thoughts on the state of the opposition and whether you reckon they are going to be able to actually, have a go at the Goliath that is the ANC. David Maimela?
No, I do think that, we are the only party that, if you look at electoral support and electoral growth, the only party that has shown successive growth from general election to another so far is actually the EFF, which is a new kid on the block. The DA has grown up to about 22-23%, right up to 2014. And in 2014, it has reached the ceiling, what we call an electoral political ceiling. It doesn't hope to go further than that. And it will only continue to be competitive in the Western Cape and in certain municipalities like Cape Town. And in the rest of the other municipalities, it will be in a coalition arrangements. At the national level, if at all it is to be part of a government, it can only be through a coalition government. But you can never hope to have the DA actually winning outright majority at the national level. And that is because our politics, given our history and legacy, still remain highly racialized. So the issue of race is still quite a very big thing in terms of electoral choices and the behavior of the electorate. So I do think that the fortunes of the DA are more or less predictable now in the foreseeable future. And I think they've squandered a lot of capital in terms of trying to be a truly South African party. And I think that project has failed. You can see the mass exodus of black leaders in the party. It has dented a lot the standing of the DA.
Professor Mngomezulu, do you share the thought that this is the beginning of the end for the official opposition, the DA?
No, absolutely. Maybe let me just start off by picking up from where Dr. Ndo left off. With regards to the DA. The DA made a political suicide the moment it came up with the view that race and gender will not matter in its politics. I said it at the time, and I'm repeating it now. The moment you disregard gender, you disregard race, you disregard age in terms of the youth, you are basically committing political suicide. Because the history of this country was built on race, and there is no way you can run away from that. And if you think that we have been a democratic country for about 28 years, you are basically missing the point. Look at America. Since when did they have their democracy? And is race an insignificant factor? My answer is definitely no. And having a state in the US, I understand the politics of that country more than I did before I went there. So the reality of the matter is that race and gender will always be part of our politics. Now, to come back to the point that Dr. Ndo is making, he's absolutely right. One of the reasons why the ANC is becoming complacent is partly because of its own making, but it's also partly because of the role played by the opposition political parties, or the role that they are not playing. Because ordinarily, in a democratic dispensation, if you're in opposition, you always project yourself as an alternative to the governing party. But we don't see that happening. We are talking about the DA deliberately because it is the official opposition, and we don't see the DA playing that role. In fact, by its own admission, it hinted that it wanted to retain the Western Cape. That is before the 2019 general election. It wanted to retain the Western Cape, and then it was also dreaming of taking Gauteng. and then possibly the Northern Cape, and that's it. And you cannot run this country if you are only relying on 3 provinces, because even those provinces, by the way, they are not in the bag. We are just counting on the majority of votes in those 3 provinces. What about the other 6? So definitely that rules the DA out. So that is why I agree with my colleague. With the EFF at the moment, I've had an opportunity to talk to some of the provincial leaders of the EFF and some of the national leaders when we were meeting at the Provincial Results Operation Center in 2019. I was saying to them, you know what, you are pressing the right buttons, you are making the correct noises, but the problem is that you are too radical. And in the case of KwaZulu-Natal, I don't see you growing with a radical stance, simply because the majority of people, not all of them, but the majority of people in KwaZulu-Natal are still, in fact, respectful of the elders, and they also choose their words whenever they talk to elderly people, and even when they engage other political parties. So if you correct that, you are on the verge of becoming the official opposition. I said it then, and I can, in fact, comfortably say it even now, that I see the EFF in a few years to come replacing the DA as the official opposition. And the ANC will remain the governing party, not because it is getting stronger, but because the opposition is getting even weaker. And it's in disarray. In fact, if you look at the case of the DA, you have just cited one case of Magashule Ghana, who has just exited the stage. It's not the first, it's not the last.
Of course, I mean, it was on the back of several others like Musima Emanes, Mbali Ntulis, and others. But Dr. No, I mean, do you share that view that they could, the EFF that is, in the next couple of years rise to become the official opposition? I mean, have they done enough, and are the misfortunes of both the ANC and the DA enough to catapult the EFF to that position?
Well, I think if you look at the other political parties in South Africa, the UDM, COPE, the ACDP and other political parties, instead of them growing, they're actually going down. And the EFF has an ambition that by 2022, they should have recruited at least 1 million members. And that is an ambitious position from an ambitious political party. And of course, if you have the DA constantly losing influential black leaders, it actually weakens the Democratic Alliance in terms of support at the polls, because the majority of South Africans who are black would constantly ask the question that says, why have you had black leaders joining you, and after a very, very short space of time, they actually leave the party? That is the answer, that is the question that will constantly be raised to the Democratic Alliance. The other question that one would ask would be to say, are our political parties in the oppositions prepared to run the country, or are they comfortable as being the opposition? I ask this question because there is a constant voice that comes from the opposition that says, all we want to do is to weaken the ANC, and we actually stay there as an opposition. So by that only, you might then find some of the political parties saying that we don't actually need many numbers, as long as we are actually being represented in parliament. Whatever kind of noise we make, it doesn't matter, as long as we've got a representation in parliament. But equally, the leaders that have been elected in the different provinces of the ANC should actually remember that those that became premiers in those provinces actually campaigned and made the ANC win. So it's not just going to be a walk on the path for those that are going to assume responsibilities in the Northwest and other provinces, because they have to go out and work to ensure that they actually become premiers and MECs in those provinces.
Smaller as they may be, I mean, David Maimela, the rest, of the opposition parties, and with all the challenges that both Prof. Ngome Zulu and Dr. Ndo have outlined, do we rule them out as significant players? And I'm also saying this on the back of, you've seen the IFP's yes, slow and in numbers terms small, but it is a comeback nevertheless. You're seeing the FF Plus, kind of rising again. Of course, some people have said it's on the back of, disillusioned DA members or former members and so on. You've also seen like new parties, capturing more than one seat, in the National Assembly. So, I mean, do we rule those out and the impact or the effect they have on the broader sort of body politic, but also on parliamentary politics? Do we say because you have one or two MPs, you don't really matter?
No, the future of South African politics lies more in the center, neither in the extreme left or the extreme right. And parties like Action SA are finding themselves on the extreme right, Freedom Front, the DA is also on the right of the political spectrum. And the EFF, of course, finds itself on the left, at least rhetorically, with the topic for another day. But any party that has prospects of succeeding in the political field in South Africa needs to move or adopt more of a social democratic type of policy platform that does not ignore the fundamentals of the historical injustice, questions of course, land, questions of equality, poverty, full employment, and those type of things. So it doesn't, even for the ANC itself, it's not even sufficient for it to look at social protections such as social grants. It has to go beyond that and really fundamentally deal with issues of reducing the cost of living, making sure that they drive a coherent and a sustainable program of development, making sure that the economy is inclusive and that entrepreneurship is actually genuine, and we've got a real national bourgeoisie class, or rather a black industrial class, as they normally say it, so that we can really prove Frantz Fanon wrong in the wretched of the earth. But I think in the end, if you don't do that, you are not likely to succeed. And so that's why even the ANC itself, when it is soul-searching and it's dealing with renewal and trying to reposition itself, it's got to actually deal with those questions. Itself, as an incumbent party, cannot avoid those questions. So any other party that hopes to be successful in the political space in South Africa has to actually attend to that.
Okay, some interesting comments on our Twitter timeline. I mean, in the seconds I have left, I'm going to read a few. Pity we can't put them up on screen because all our panelists are online. I mean, Alex says, "Good evening, Vuyo. The only opposition that will be in government in 2024 will be the EFF under the leadership of CIC Julius Malema." Uchamba Sagasusa says, "But Vuyo, I'm afraid I think if SA allows my ANC to bring laws and influence in your house, the same case of infights, greed, lies, and total chaos will come into your house with the Zamazamas and Dudula's children running amok in your house." Biliato says, "In South Africa, we don't have leaders with a purpose or passion. Ask any leader about their passion for South Africa. No one has, otherwise they would be pushing it once in office. At least EFF has, which is black consciousness." Another tweet says, watching SABC News. Okay, I can't see that. But then, anyway, I mean, some comments really from some of the people who have been watching. Let me thank our panel of political analysts, Beki Mgomezulu, Levi Ndo, and David Maimela for talking to us about the state of politics in South Africa this week on the back, of course, of various incidents, various things that we heard. And the question we're posing was whether these things mean anything going into the future, whether it's the ANC's elective conference in about 4 months' time or the national and provincial election in 4 years' time. But that's our show for tonight. I hope you have a great weekend. And till we meet again on Monday, have a great time.